I'm going to start with a spoiler alert. If you're an IMDb fan, maybe you get that reference. My spoiler for you is that I'm going to talk about love. And I know this is the first time for me ever beginning a sermon with a spoiler alert. And I think I might be, in fact, one of the first rabbis to ever begin a sermon with a spoiler alert. But I want to be original and at least something, because I'm going to talk about love, a topic that's so covered in pop culture that it's hard to miss. Love, we find it in about 80% of the pop songs that you hear on the radio, about 90% of every new movie that comes out, and pretty much most of any romance, novel, teen literature that you find all deals with love. But the kind of love that I want to talk about tonight isn't the kind of love that you can learn about through pop culture. It's something else. It's something deep, and I think it's profound, and it's something that you might not see every day. There's a word that I think might be best used to describe this kind of love. I'm choked up a little bit because I don't think I've ever said this word in a sanctuary before. This word, you might actually hear it in a church before you hear it in a synagogue, and that word is grace. Grace. Now, Jews, we tend to shy away from using this word grace. From my understanding, grace is about a love between God and people, or simply between people, and it's a love that's unmerited, given freely, and given in abundance. Perhaps the reason I never thought about this word until about a little short of a year ago was that I hadn't really experienced this concept of grace before. But as you might know, about a year ago, something transformative happened in my life. My wife Stephanie and I were graced, if you will. We were graced with the birth of our daughter, Lila. And from the second Lila was born, I was in love. I mean, I looked at her and she looked exactly like me. But even if she didn't look like me, I still would have loved her just the same. And when you think about it, it might seem that this kind of love is illogical after all the spit up, all the diaper changes, all the screaming in the middle of the night and sleep deprivation. Still, love. And this was new for me, because every previous relationship that I've had in my life that was based on love was based on a kind of earned love. It was relational love, covenantal love. Even the way that I conceived of my relationship with God was through covenant. And I had never thought about this term, grace. But Lila taught me something new. And it caused me to think about grace in other contexts other than just my daughter. It made me think about the grace of God, the grace that God gives unto us, and the way that we're commanded in the Torah to love the stranger. To love the stranger. Love someone who we don't even know. And in fact, this love for the stranger is the most commanded mitzvah in the entire Torah. So how is it then that I haven't yet thought about grace? The stranger in the Torah is the orphan, the widow, also even the Egyptian who's supposed to be our enemy. Yet we're supposed to love these people with whom we don't have any previous relationship. There's a philosopher who I'm very taken with. His name is Martin Buber. You might have heard the name. You might have even heard me speak about Martin Buber in the past before. But Buber teaches us that the best avenue to express love to God is through another human being. He teaches that when we elevate our interactions with the others from a place that's relatively ordinary to a place of grace, that profound love, we're best able to connect with God and fulfill the commandment that we recite in the V'ahavta, to love God with all our might, with all our soul, and with all of our being. And grace doesn't just improve our relationships, it improves our community, and it improves the world. Now, up until now, I haven't yet told you what the word in Hebrew for grace is. It's rather complicated because it's a word that means, in fact, a couple of things. Probably the best word, the word that we introduced earlier tonight, is this word chesed. You might find if you walk right outside into the atrium and look up right behind our almond blossom, you'll see this word emblazoned on the wall. And the word appears in a quote, one of the pillars of our community, the pillar quotes, which is, Al shlosha divarim ha'olam omed. The world stands, or the world depends on three different things. Torah, avodah, which is worship, and gimilut chasadim, acts of grace, or acts of loving kindness. Now notice here that chesed is not just a feeling that we have for one another. It's the way that we act towards one another. The way to love God is not to feel love for others, but to act with unadulterated love towards others. This is a hard concept, but the rabbis shed a little bit of light on exploring this idea of grace. And the book Pirkei Avot, the wisdom of our fathers, the rabbis try to explain this concept a little more. And they teach us, Kol ahava shehi tluya b'davar, batal davar, batela ahava. When love depends on something beyond itself, the love disappears when that something disappears. However, when love is unconditional, when it appears as grace, it's limitless. And they give some examples of this. Love is limitless when it's unconditional. And the example they give might not be the typical example that you're thinking of. They say this kind of grace can be found with the story of David and Jonathan. Now, you might remember the story of King David. But before King David was king, there ruled a king named King Saul. And King Saul's son was named Jonathan, and he was heir to the throne. And at the same time, the prophet Nathan had deemed that David was going to be the next king. So you can imagine the conflict that we might expect between these two people. One person who's the heir to the throne, and the next person who's the divinely picked choice. And they're competing for the same position to be king of Israel. But instead of becoming enemies, as you might find in the Game of Thrones, they become friends who love one another unconditionally. They help one another, even though we might expect that they would be at war. And through their grace for one another, they show their love to God. And this was the time of the judges, a time of hatred, enmity, war in the world. And we find ourselves this week seeming like our world is very similar, filled with hatred, filled with anger, filled with fear. And that Disney-style love that normally fills Orlando hasn't been enough to mend the brokenness and the vulnerability that so many feel right now. Amidst the anger and even the hatred, we ask ourselves how we can move forward as a country. And I might not have the solutions for Congress, but I can tell you that we should consider starting from a place of chesed, a place of showing love to others, even if we don't know them, and even if they haven't earned it. This morning when I was thinking about this, my eye caught a particular article in the New York Times. The article was entitled, "In Shaken Orlando, Comfort Dogs Arrive with Unconditional Love." In fact, it was the most emailed article of the Times this morning. And the article described a team of specially trained comfort dogs who were sent to Orlando to be a loving presence to the surviving victims of the Pulse nightclub shooting. And I read the article and thought the concept of dogs showing chesed is incredibly bizarre, but at the same time, possibly an interesting model for us. Our question and our challenge is how we can show grace to the vulnerable and how we can show grace to each other. And I want to suggest several ways that we can do so. We can show chesed, we can show grace with our words. Amidst the political vitriol on every single news channel, on social media, and in our everyday conversations, be the one who channels love and not hatred from those who are different from you. Engage from a place of chesed, from a place of grace. Use words to reach out with those afflicted and express your love, maybe through a phone call, through a card, or perhaps even a social media post. We can also show our chesed through our actions. It's not always enough to speak words of chesed. To make an impact, we need to perform gimilut chasadim, acts of grace or acts of loving kindness. So I want to encourage us to open our hearts, to give to those in need, to organizations seeking to help bring wholeness to the world and to our country. We need to support the stranger who might be stranded on the side of the road or wherever we might find him. We can show grace to others by inviting someone into your home, to your Shabbat table who you might not know so well. We show grace to others by putting someone else, maybe someone we don't even know, before ourselves. The world depends on acts of chesed, for without grace, we may be crippled with anger and hatred. And I want to suggest that we can show grace with gratitude. Gratitude is one of the most profound expressions of grace. On one level, we say the Birkat Hamazon, the grace after the meal, and we express our gratitude to God, but even more powerful is showing grace by expressing gratitude to others. And I want to say that I'm thankful for the first responders who saved lives of victims wounded in the attacks in Orlando. I'm thankful for the team that neutralized the attack. I'm thankful for our senators, Republicans and Democrats, who on Wednesday night, with a 15-hour filibuster, pushed the vote on laws designed to prevent further attacks on our country. And I'm thankful that God has graced us with resilience. So tonight, I want to leave us with a challenge. This Shabbat, consider rising above the atmosphere of anger, hatred, and sadness around us and ascend to a place of grace. Open the door to showing those around you a deep love, a love which they might not deserve, but a love which the world needs right now. Be a harbinger of chesed, gracing those around you with loving words, acts of loving kindness, and gratitude. Shabbat Shalom.